الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين، واللعنة الدائم على أعدائهم أجمعين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله الحكيم في محكم كتابه الكريم: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. وإذ قال ربك للملائكة إني جاعل في الأرض خليفة، قالوا أتجعل فيها من يفسد فيها ويسفك الدماء ونحن نسبح بحمدك ونقدس لك، قال إني أعلم ما لا تعلمون. وعلم آدم الأسماء كلها ثم عرضهم على الملائكة فقال أنبئوني بأسماء هؤلاء إن كنتم صادقين. قالوا سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. قال يا آدم أنبئهم بأسمائهم، فلما أنبأهم بأسمائهم قال ألم أقل لكم إني أعلم غيب السماوات والأرض وأعلم ما تبدون وما كنتم تكتمون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات. اللهم صل على محمد. For the love of our beloved Prophet and his beloved progeny, please recite a second loud salawat. For the hastening in the return of our beloved 12th Imam, a third final loud salawat. The topic that we'll be discussing tonight and tomorrow night, inshallah, is the topic of asking why in Islam. A topic in which we explore the reasons and the wisdoms behind Islamic rulings. This is a topic that ties in very beautifully with the ashab of the beloved third Imam of ours, because the ashab that we commemorate during these days and nights, Ali al-Akbar, Qasim ibn al-Hasan, these companions of the Imam, it seems as though there was never a moment in the movement of Imam al-Hussein where they questioned what Imam al-Hussein was doing. It seems as though Abu Abdullah was leading the path, and the likes of Ali al-Akbar and the likes of Qasim ibn al-Hasan and the likes of Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas were simply following. It seems as though they had this full trust in what Imam al-Hussein was doing. Very little do you ever find conversations between them and Imam al-Hussein asking why are we setting out on this journey, whereas you find with many others that Imam al-Hussein has had this conversation multiple times. Many of them have in fact tried to change the decision that the Imam has made. And so this brings us to the topic of asking why in Islam. This is of course a topic that directly correlates with one of the most important, one of the most fundamental characteristics of the human being. If you look at the creatures that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created, you find that there is no creature like the human being who's always trying to find the reality. There's a thirst in the human being, a curiosity in the human being, to go and look for and demand the truth of different matters. This is not something you find in other creatures that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created. You only find this in the human being to this extent. The human being, every time he witnesses a natural phenomena, when something happens around him, he doesn't just witness it and observe it. He stops and he asks why. He wants to get to the deeper layers of this discussion. If he sees the apple fall from the tree, he doesn't just sit and say, well, the apple fell from the tree. He asks why, and if there's an answer to that, he will ask why again. If there's an answer to that, he will ask why again. And he constantly has this thirst for the truth, so much so that if you speak to those individuals who study the character of the human being, they will tell you that this thirst for the truth in many ways is an intrinsic characteristic of the human being. It is a fitri characteristic of the human being. There's no human being that you will find on earth who doesn't care about the truth and the reality of the matters. He's always thirsty to find out more. And that brings us to this topic. At the end of the day, if the human being hears, for example, instead of natural phenomena, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells him to pray, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells him to fast, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells him to do this or to do that, this same tendency that he has, the same characteristic that he has, starts to manifest itself. He naturally wants to ask why, what's the wisdom behind it, what's going on behind the scenes, so to speak. And he does this through this idea and through this concept of asking questions at all times. And so tonight and tomorrow night, we want to take some time to delve into this topic of asking why in Islam. What is Islam's take on this whole issue? Are we allowed to do it? Are we not allowed to do it? Is it something that's encouraged? Is it something that's not encouraged? Did the Sahaba of the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt ask why when they were commanded with different things? Or did they just take it and never pose such questions? That is the topic that we will be delving into tonight. And we will do so by posing the following questions. Number one, does Islam see the idea of asking why and posing questions in a negative light, or does it see it in a positive light? Number two, what did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say and how did He react when the malaika raised their concern and raised their question as to why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created this human being who could potentially be a source of a lot of corruption? Number three, did the companions of the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt ever come up to them and ask them for the reason and the wisdom behind this ruling or that ruling? Or was it the case that if the Ahlul Bayt told them something, they would just take it and they would never ask this question, they would never pose this question? Number four, what is the mistake that many of our elders, many of our educators, many of our parents many times make when they want to explain Islam to the younger generation and to their own children as it relates to explaining the reasons and the wisdoms behind different Islamic rulings? And number five, and finally, why hasn't Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shared with us the wisdom and the reason behind every single Islamic ruling that He has given to us? Wouldn't have that made life so much easier? Wouldn't have that made faith so much easier if I knew the reason why I pray 5 times a day, if I knew the reason why my salat has to start with takbir and nothing else, if I knew the reason why I have to fast 29 days and nothing more and nothing less, for example? This would have made my faith a lot easier. Why hasn't Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala done this and made our job a lot easier? It seems as though on purpose He is keeping some of this reasoning to Himself. What is the reason behind this? Tonight, inshallah, we'll delve into these 5 questions with a loud salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. As we discuss this topic, I will be honest with the brothers and sisters, this is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. It is a topic that I feel like is not discussed nearly enough in our communities, and it is a topic that can answer a number of questions, a host of questions that our younger generation has about their religion. We said that the human being has this characteristic of asking why. None of the other creatures of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are like this to this extent. If the human being gets into an accident, if the human being runs into a difficult time or a hard time, he will pause, hopefully, if he is wise, and he will ask why. What was the reason behind this? What can I learn from this event that took place? The other creatures of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the other animals, you don't see this amongst them. The same event might happen to them over and over again. they will never pause to ask why. Yes? The cow, for example, the sheep, he will never ask, well, where did my relatives go? Where did this person go? Where did that person go? Right? It's never a question that occurs to them. The honeybee makes his honey, and his honey is being taken for thousands of years. He never asks, what can I do so that my honey is not taken next time? This is a characteristic that the human being has been gifted with, a characteristic that the human being has been blessed with. But as much as it is a blessing, it is also something that poses its challenges. Because then when Islam tells the human being, you have to do this and you have to do that, you have to live your life this way or that way, naturally the human being is going to ask why. What is the reason behind this? So Islam, does it take a positive approach in this regard, or does it frown upon such questions? If I ask, why is it that my wudu has to be done in this way, for example? Why is it in the Shia school of thought that if I'm doing my wudu and I go upwards on purpose, according to all of our maraji, this wudu is batil? Is it okay for me to ask what happens in this process? Does my spirituality, all of it, just disappear simply because I went upwards? Are questions of this type good questions? Are they bad questions? How does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala view these questions? Let us take ourselves to the very beginning of the creation of Adam to see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, at the very least, He does not frown upon questions of this type. Because from the very beginning, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the human being, there were questions in the minds of the angels. They raised questions to Him, they raised their concerns to Him. قَالَ إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً. He said, I am going to place a representative for myself. قَالُوا أَتَجْعَلُ فِيهَا مَنْ يُفْسِدُ فِيهَا. Wait a second. We do everything you need us to do. What is this human being you're trying to create? وَيَسْفِكُ الدِّمَاء. He might cause corruption. He might create serious problems on earth. This was the angels asking this question, raising this question, this concern to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They were, in other words, asking why? Why would you do such a thing? And nowhere in the story of Adam alayhi salam and these angels do you find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reprimanding them for this question. How dare you ask this question? Why would you ever ask a question like that? No, these are angels. They technically cannot even do anything wrong, yes? Angels don't have that free will. So if they're doing it, this automatically means that this is not an act that is frowned upon. It is not an act that is negative in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes, in some other religions and ideologies and lifestyles, you will hear this type of a response. If you were to ask why, they would say, what do you mean why? I thought you were a believer. I thought you had faith. Faith, intellect, these two, they don't match with one another. Faith is one thing, intellect is a different thing. Don't try to mix the two with one another. Yes, if you were to say, this Trinity doesn't match in my mind so much, they will say, listen, faith is one thing, intellect is a different thing. Don't try to mix these two with one another. But in Islam, the idea of asking why has its place. Nowhere in this process did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say, how dare you ask questions about why I do the things that I do? How dare you ask why is the wisdom behind my actions, for example? He never said that. What did He say? قَالَ إِنِّي أَعْلَمُ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُ. He said, I know something you guys don't know about it. And then as the story unfolds, and of course this story, I will tell you, is one of the most discussed and one of the most disputed stories. Disputed in the sense that there are differences of opinion as to what were these realities that Adam was taught. What does it mean when he says these realities or these names back to the angels? There's a lot of discussion amongst Mufassirin regarding the story of Adam and Shaitan. Is all of this a literal story? It is a metaphorical story. There's a lot of discussion with regards to it. Nonetheless, what we can take away from it for sure is that then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took time to explain to them the wisdom behind why He had created Adam. Not only did He not reprimand them, He actually showed them. And then He took Adam and He taught Adam all of these asma, as the verses of the Quran say. And then He brought the malaika, said, "Anbi'uni bi asma'i ha'ula." Tell me the names of all of these, in kuntum sadiqeen. They said, قَالُوا سُبْحَانَكَ لَا عِلْمَ لَنَا. We don't have that type of knowledge. You know that. إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ الْعَلِيمُ الْحَكِيمُ. You're the one with all the knowledge. We don't have that knowledge. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala turned to Adam, and Adam said these names, and he said, أَلَمْ أَقُلْ لَكُمْ إِنِّي أَعْلَمُ غَيْبَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. I told you, I have this knowledge. But there is no sense of reprimanding of the angels. And this sets the tone of asking questions within Islam, that generally speaking, it doesn't seem to be something that is frowned upon. Then you move on beyond this, you find in Surah Al-Furqan, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to describe for us His special servants, He says, these special servants of mine are the type that when they come across our signs, they don't just blindly fall to sajda. They understand these signs. How do they understand these signs? Part of it is asking questions. Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do it this way? Why did He create this way? Why did He legislate this way? Why is this ruling in this manner? This is all part of that deeper understanding. He says, وَالَّذِينَ إِذَا ذُكِّرُوا بِآيَاتِ رَبِّهِمْ لَمْ يَخِرُّوا عَلَيْهَا صُمًّا وَعُمْيَانًا. These are not the type of people who have a very superficial understanding of things. When they are reminded of our verses, our signs, they just fall to sajda blindly. They have a deep understanding of things. They ask in order to learn more, to have a deeper understanding. Then that leads them to do what? This proper sajda of theirs. That's where their sajda is much more valuable than the one who has the superficial understanding of things. This is the tone that the Quran sets for this discussion. Recite a salawat, please. As you continue though, you find that this is also found in the seerah of the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt as well. Not only did they not frown upon the idea of asking why, it almost seems as though they encourage these questions. But with a little bit of one point that we have to get to later on. So there's a little, pointer there that we will get to later on. When did they ever encourage people to come and ask them why? This is clearly visible in the seerah of Ali ibn Abi Talib. The narrations say, and these are narrations there are numbers to these narrations, not one or two, in which Ali ibn Abi Talib uttered a line, he spoke some words that no other Sahabi of the Prophet has ever dared to speak. What lines were these? Asbagh ibn Nubata says, after he was chosen as Khalifa, after people finally recognized the Imam as Khalifa, and they gave bay'ah to him, it almost seems as though it's the first thing he did after Khilafah, after becoming the Khalifa. He says he came and he sat in the masjid and he was wearing the clothing of the Prophet. And he had with him the imamah of the Prophet. And he had with him the sword of the Prophet and the na'alain of the Prophet. And he sat there on this minbar, he turned to people. He said a couple lines and then he said that famous line. He said, Saluni qabla an tafqiduni. Come and ask me. And according to one of the narrations, he followed up with what? I know the paths of heaven better than I know the paths of earth. There's no other Sahaba that can make a claim like this. Forgive me, but there's only two options if someone says something like this. Either, forgive me, they are extremely ignorant and they're just making a claim out of nowhere, or they are extremely knowledgeable that they feel confident enough to make a claim like this. And of course we know Ali ibn Abi Talib wouldn't have been the first. He said, Saluni qabla an tafqiduni. And of course we hear in history that different responses were given to him, different questions were asked of him, and he said, I will respond to you. If you ask about the Torah, I will respond to you based on the Torah. If you ask me about the Injil, I will answer to you based on the Injil. If you ask me of the Quran, I will answer to you based on the Quran. But I will do it in such a way that these books will come to life and they will turn to me and they will say, Sadaqa Aliyun. What Ali said is right. Ma kadhaba. This is what Ali ibn Abi Talib is saying. And he used to encourage others to come and ask. How much did they ask? What type of questions did they ask? History will tell us there were silly questions that were asked. But this is something Ahlul Bayt were very open about this. This is why Zurara, that famous student of Imam al-Baqir and Imam al-Sadiq, he's in a conversation with Imam al-Baqir. And he asks him about these lines that Ali ibn Abi Talib uttered. He says, your great-grandfather, is it true? He used to say, Saluni amma shi'tum. Come and ask of whatever you like. It's a big claim. He said, yes, that is true. That is exactly what my great-grandfather used to say. And then he said, there is no knowledge except that it's come through Amirul Mu'mineen. And then he said a beautiful line, and this is in the context of the Ahlul Bayt now being isolated at this point, yes? Moving on into the time of the Abbasids, knowledge was becoming a thing. It wasn't so much of a thing during the time of Bani Umayyah. During the time of Bani al-Abbas, it started to become, a very prevalent thing within society. This is in that context. Now Ahlul Bayt are being isolated. He said, people can go wherever they like to go. فَلْيَذْهَبِ النَّاسِ. People can go whichever way they can go. But the reality is, if they want knowledge, they have to come here. And the narration says he pointed to his own house. They were very open about this. Not only is it not frowned upon, they used to encourage this. Come, while you have the opportunity, come and ask your questions. And there are so many instances of this that you find they were eager to answer questions. It wasn't something they were trying to get out of. No, they were eager. So much so that if someone came and asked a question in a difficult situation, at a difficult time, they would still answer him. And you find this before the battle of Jamal begun. Before the battle of Jamal begun, you find the army is on the other side, this army is on this side, and the battle of Jamal is just such a fascinating piece of Islamic history. And the theological implications that it has is just unbelievable theological implications in this regard. Talha, Zubair, Aisha are on one side, Ali ibn Abi Talib is on the other side. Many of the Sahaba of the Prophet are also with him. And in those moments, the narration says, A'rabi came to Ali ibn Abi Talib, said, Ya Ali, I have a question. And almost all of the companions said, now's not the time. You see the army standing there, we're over here. They try to get rid of him. And Ali ibn Abi Talib said, what is your question? He said, I want to understand, what is this tawheed that you speak of in the correct understanding of it? And Ali ibn Abi Talib said, I will answer your question. And many of the companions, of course, like you and I, were surprised. And then he beautifully added, he said, this correct understanding of tawheed is why I go to battle with these guys anyways. Therefore, I will take the time to answer your question. The narration continues, and he said there are 4 types of tawheed. 2 of them we accept, 2 of them we don't accept. And he answers the question in a situation like this, where we would sit there and say, what is this? Now is not the time. Not only were they okay with it, not only did they encourage it, even if you came to them at difficult times, they would still try as much as they could to do what? To answer these questions, because these questions were important for them. Because it can deepen the understanding of the human being regarding the religion. And they have answered so many of these questions that nowadays you have books that we have from our heritage and the legacy of our early scholars that are compiling the ahadith in which the Imam was answering the question, why? Why do we do this? Why do we do that? Why is this called this? Why is the dunya called the dunya? Why is the akhirah called the akhirah? Why is this Imam called this name? Why is this person called that name? Why do I pray? Why do I fast? These are compiled in books. In particular, one book that shines probably brighter than any other is Ilal al-Shara'i' of Shaykh al-Saduq. The reasonings behind legislations. Whole books compiled on this issue. It was not a rare incident that someone would come and ask a question, why ya ibn Rasulullah, why do we do this? No, it was so much, you have books compiled on this topic. So generally, this is the approach that Islam has taken in this regard. Recite a salawat, please. Now, when you look at these books, or these ahadith in which the Ahlul Bayt are answering the question, why? You will find that actually there are 2 types of why that we ask. And these 2 types of why have completely different approaches. We have to discuss them separately. There is a time where someone asks why, and what they mean is, why are you claiming that this is part of Islam? In other words, they're asking for the verse of the Quran, they're asking for the hadith that shows us this is part of the teachings of Islam. Someone might come to you and say, why do you combine prayers? This person is not asking for the wisdom, he's not asking for the benefit, he's not asking for the purpose. He's asking for what? Where is the hadith or the verse of the Quran? Yes? Where is it in the Seera of the Prophet that shows that this is part of Islam? This is the first type of why. Then you have the second type of why that we ask. No, this person is asking the benefits. What's the purpose behind it? What do I get out of it at the end of the day? What is the maslahah? behind this particular ruling. And these two are very different from one another. As it relates to the first type of why, when someone asks, why do I have to do this? And what they mean is, what is the reason behind it? In the sense of, what's the verse or what's the hadith that speaks of this particular teaching? I want to make sure this is something that Islam actually says. Is this a why that you and I should be asking? 110%. Because if you and I don't ask this question of why, when it comes to these different practices that we find in our lives and our culture, the lines between culture and religion will start to get blurred. Someone says we have to do this as part of the wedding. Someone says we have to do this as part of this, part of that. Part of the majalis, we got to do this. Says why? What's the hadith? What's the verse of the Quran? What's the general teaching in Islam that tells us that we're supposed to do this? If you don't do this, then culture and religion, they start to get mixed with one another. But if you ask this question often enough, what happens? It stops this from happening. Because you're constantly asking, what's the reason behind this? Why do we do it this way? Why do we combine prayers, for example? Why do I have to do wudu this way? What's the verse or what's the hadith? Where are we getting this from Islam? This is 100% necessary. If you don't ask this question, brothers and sisters, you will fall into one of these two categories. Either you will become part of that group of Muslims who are so extremely conservative, everything is haram. Everything is haram. Why can't I do this? Well, we've never done it before, so it's haram. Our parents didn't used to do it this way, so you can't do it either. This is one group. Or you fall in the other category. Believe it or not, we have both. Which one is more, which one is less, I'll leave that up to you guys. We have both. You fall into the other category. What's the other category? Oh, everything is okay. Everything is halal, no problem. But if you ask why do you say this is okay? Why do you say this is problematic? Then you won't fall under that categories. You might say, Sheikh, I don't remember the last time I asked this question anyways. I'm busy, I have a 9 to 5, I have kids, I have family, I'm busy. Here's the good thing, you don't have to ask this question. Your marja does this for you. That's what your marja does. Your marja, every step of the way, when someone says, you have to pray this way, he says, why? Let me see the hadith. Oh, this hadith is like this, it's like that. This one doesn't match with history. This one doesn't match with intellect. This one doesn't match with Quran. This one doesn't match with other ahadith. You know how many filters a hadith has to go through for a marja to put a stamp on it? It's not that simple. It's quite difficult. The good thing is you don't have to worry about that. You have someone asking that question on your behalf. So when he looks at something and says, you know what, this is haram, then if it's part of my culture, this is where Islam is drawing the line between my culture and religion. It's very easy. Many times we ask this question, how are we to separate culture from religion? The answer is you constantly ask these whys. Some of that is haram. This is where Islam is saying, you have your culture, wonderful, but this part of your culture is going too far. We're going to stop it here. There are other areas where it's mubah, and Islam has no problem with you going about your own business, doing your own mubah in your own way. It's part of your culture. You want to do it this way, that's fine. I give this example many times. I say a chocolate cake. Different people, different ethnicities, they'll make a chocolate cake in a different way. If you come from the Iranian culture like me, even though it's a chocolate cake, at the end of the day, there's going to be some sort of fruit that's going to make its way into this cake. Some pineapple, some date, something like that. That's just part of our culture. Does Islam have this big problem with this? No, it's mubah, you do as you like. If they ask you to make a chocolate cake, somehow, some way, some za'atar is going to make its way in there. How? What does that have to do with chocolate cake? It's culture, it's no problem. That's a chocolate cake for you, that's a chocolate cake for me. If you ask another ethnicity, they'll have something else in there. It's just that's how we make chocolate cakes. Does Islam have a problem with this? No, it's mubah, you do as you wish. And then Islam says this is wajib. And you realize, if my culture, this is where Islam is drawing the line. This asking this why is very important. And the good thing is someone is already doing the work for you. You don't even have to worry about it. You want to separate culture from religion? See, where are those areas where Islam says this is haram? That's where he is limiting culture. If you do it, it's culture, it's not religion anymore. It's very simple. This is the first type of why. Recite a salawat, please. Before we move on to the second type of why, which will take the rest of our discussion and tomorrow's discussion, inshallah, there's one point we have to remember about this first type of why, and that is this. And I mention this because I see this mistake happening all the time. That when you ask for the reason why we are saying this is part of Islam, please do not make the mistake of saying, where is this only in the Quran? This is it might seem simple to many of us, but this is a mistake that I see, especially our younger generation, makes all the time. Why? Because hadith is a bit messy. That's how hadith is, yes? There's work that needs to be done on it. You have to be an expert. In order to simplify the process, what do? We say, tell me from the Quran. Is it part of the Quran? There's a lot of things that aren't there in the Quran, including the most important act of worship that any Muslim will do across the board, which is salat. This salat of ours, 90% of the rulings are not found in the Quran. Maybe the timings you find, for example. Outside of that, do you find any details of salat in the Quran? It's not there. And people say, it's really very interesting, they will tell you, they say, Shaykh, speak to me with the words of God. Speak to me with the verses of the Quran. Say, did you pray today? He says, yes, I prayed today. So how did you pray with just the verses of the Quran? I don't know how this works. This is just the verses of the Quran. It never says start with Takbiratul Ihram. Never says you have to end with sajda. It never says if you skip 2 sajdas, you're going to have a problem all of a sudden. There's none of this mentioned in the Quran. No, Quran is one source, hadith is another source. We can't sit there and say, where is this in the Quran only? Across the board, whatever school of thought you believe in, this holds true. It's not even a Shia thing. Shia, Sunni, same thing applies. This is the first type of why. Moving on to the second type of why. The second type of why is when I ask, and what I mean is, what is the wisdom? What is the purpose? What is the maslaha? What am I going to get out of this act of worship? Yes? What is the impact that this act of worship, for example, is going to have on my life? And because of that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it halal or haram or wajib, for example, or whatever the case might be. Do we have this in our heritage? Yes, we have a lot of this, as we mentioned. But if you were to categorize these reasons into 4 different categories, you would find the following. The first category are those rulings in Islam that don't even need you to ask why. They're so clear, you already know the reason behind them. Stealing is haram. No one is going to sit there, hopefully, and ask why is stealing haram. It's clear already. It's very clear cut. You understand it, you move on. Then comes the second category. The second category are those rulings that maybe 100 years ago, 200 years ago, we didn't know much about them. Today maybe science is shedding a little bit of light on them. Now we understand better, for example, what it might do. You drink alcohol, you drink intoxicants, it will create problems. Physically it will create problems in terms of, impairing your judgment, so on and so forth. This is the second category. When it comes to these also, you may not ask why too much, because science is already shedding light on some of it for you. Then comes to the third category. The third category are those things you don't know on your own. Science hasn't told you necessarily. But alhamdulillah, somewhere, some person asked the Ahlul Bayt about this. They raised this question to them, and the Ahlul Bayt have answered this question, and it happens to be the case that this hadith has come to us now. Do we have a hadith of this sort? We mentioned already. We definitely do. In the khutbah of Lady Fatima Zahra, she mentions a lot of the reasons behind a lot of things. This is why you give zakat. This is why you pray, for example. This is category number 3. Up until here is all wonderful and great. Then comes category number 4. Category number 4 becomes a bit challenging. Category number 4 are all of the detailed rulings that we have in Islam. The detailed rulings. And many of them, the Ahlul Bayt have not told us what is the reason behind them. Dare I say, if you take this category number 4, it is equal to or more than 1, 2, and 3 put together. Yes, the general concepts in Islam, we understand the reasons behind them. If someone were to ask you, why do you pray? Say, it's building a connection with my Creator and with my Lord. This is clear. But if someone asks you, why do you have to pray before the sun comes out? Then all of a sudden, I don't know that. Why is it in the morning you have to do 2, in the afternoon you have to do 4? Many of us growing up, we used to come up with reasons for these in our minds. Yes, we say yes, 2 because it's early in the morning. It's difficult. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to ease you into the day, right? But then Islam says you should wake up early in the morning, so it should have been 4 or 5 actually. But anyways. So why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say, when I'm doing wudu, I cannot go upwards? What's the reason behind this? Why does my sajda have to be done in this way? Why do I have jilsatul istiraha between the 2 sajdas, for example? Why? The details of these acts of worship of ours, there's thousands of questions that you can come up with regards to them. Do we know the answer to all of these or most of these even? No, we don't. And parents usually get very hesitant when I say this. Because they say, Sheikh, I hope you're going somewhere with this. You're trying to say there's no reason behind any of this? No, we're saying there are reasons. We're saying we don't know the reasons behind them. And Islam is completely open about this issue. Islam doesn't shy away from this issue. There are thousands of detailed rulings within Islam. We don't know the reason behind them. Look at the concept of inheritance within Islam. Hundreds of rulings. Do we know the reason behind every ruling? No. Maybe 4, 5, 6 of them we can come up with something. The details of them? Why 1/3? Why 1/4? Why not 1/5, for example? Why not 1/6, for example? Hundreds of rulings, we don't know the reason behind them. Yes, fasting, I understand. Nowadays we'll say, I know it's intermittent fasting anyways, so it's kind of cool and trendy nowadays anyways. So that's the benefit behind it. It reminds you of the poor, for example, so on and so forth. This is wonderful. But if someone were to quiz us, ask us in terms of the details, why do you have to start at Fajr? Why not start, at sunrise, for example? Wouldn't that make life so much easier? Instead of starting, Salat is 3:50 here apparently during Ramadan. You start, half an hour later, make life a lot easier. Why is it when you fast, certain sins will break your fast, some other sins that are even greater than those sins won't break your fast? You're fasting, if you attribute a lie to the Prophet Ahlul Bayt, what happens? According to most scholars, this fast is batil. Knowingly, if someone does it knowingly. But if this person, for example, lies, if this person backbites, for example, which is a sin that might even be greater, does this invalidate his fast from a fiqhi perspective, from a jurisprudential perspective? No. Yes, spiritually it affects him, and there's no doubt about that, and that discussion is a separate discussion. But why? Why is it set up like this? And thousands of other questions that you can come up with better than I can do it. Thousands of other questions. The reality is we don't know the reasons behind all of these detailed rulings that we have in Islam. And many of us start to get hesitant. Why? Because when we hear this, we say, well, I don't want to follow a religion just blindly. I don't believe in blind faith. No, this is nothing like blind faith. Do not make that mistake. Blind faith is when the fundamentals of this religion are not clear to you. The basic notions and concepts in the religion are not proven to you. And you just say, I just believe because intellect and faith are 2 separate things. That's blind faith. That is not what Islam is one bit. You want to ask questions about God's existence and the day of Qiyamah and the prophethood of the Prophet and all of these fundamental issues, be my guest, you're supposed to ask questions there. In fact, the reason why we don't ask the reason why we ask so many questions when it comes to these details is because we don't ask enough questions there. Islam's not asking you to have this blind faith. No, this is not blind faith. He's already given you enough reason to believe. But when it comes to these details, He's not shared with us the reason behind all of these. And it's at the same time completely okay for you to ask why. It's okay. You can ask why. It's not a problem. You just can't ask why with the perspective of, if you tell me the reason, I'll follow. If you don't tell me the reason, if the reason's not there in hadith, or it's there in hadith and as we will discuss tomorrow, it doesn't make sense to me, then I'm not going to practice it anymore. Anyone who approaches religion with this perspective will never be able to practice religion. Khalas, done. If you approach religion with the perspective of, I want to know what's the detailed reasoning behind every ruling, you will never be able to practice the religion of Islam. 100% guaranteed. Because there are thousands of rulings, we don't know the reason behind them. And Islam is not shy about this. No. So why couldn't have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala share these reasons with us? Wouldn't that have made faith so much easier? Your non-Muslim friends ask, for example, why do you pray 5 times a day? And then you explain to him, for example, when you pray 5 times a day, your energy of your body connects with, I don't know, some other energy. And then all of a sudden this time he says, wow, what a religion. Wouldn't that make life a lot easier? It would. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had shared the reason behind every single detailed Islamic ruling that we have, couldn't He have done that? He has all the knowledge anyways, and we're claiming there is a reason behind it anyways. Couldn't He have just shared all of this with us? Seems as though He could. Someone might say, no, He can't, because if He puts it in the Quran, this Quran becomes too long. It's already 6,000 verses. You want to add all these verses, all these other rulings, it's going to become 30,000, 40,000 verses. It'll be volume number 2, it becomes a problem, all this kind of stuff. Not strong enough of an answer. Someone says, well, Ahlul Bayt could have explained to us. Instead of 1 Ilalul Sharaya, we could have had 15 Ilalul Sharayas. This person will tell you, no, people wouldn't understand if Ahlul Bayt would tell them. Therefore, they didn't speak of these ideas very much. This also is not the strongest argument. Ahlul Bayt mentioned many things that people of their time could not understand. And maybe even today we don't understand. There might be people coming later, they might look at us, they'll say these people in the early 2000s, they had such a superficial understanding of what Ahlul Bayt were saying. Because times we look at hadith that our earlier scholars might have struggled to understand. And we understand better. And hadith says, Suratul Ikhlas, the final verses of Suratul Hadid are what? These are verses that the people of the end of times will have a deeper understanding of compared to the people of the time of the Prophet. This hadith says this. So they could have shared these with us. So the question still remains, why? Why didn't they share all of these reasons with us? Make life so much easier. Tomorrow, inshallah, we'll delve into 2 main reasons. And the first reason will break down into 3 or 4 reasons in and of its own as to why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not shared the reasons behind these rulings with us. And that will give us a much better understanding of our religion as a whole. As I mentioned when we began this topic, this is a topic that is extremely critical in having a deeper understanding of the religion, and at the same time a topic that is not discussed nearly as often as it needs to be discussed within our communities. Tomorrow, inshallah, we'll delve into that. Why didn't Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just share all these reasons with us and make life so much easier? My faith would have been so much stronger. If God were to tell me why I will do exactly this way, I wouldn't struggle with it anymore. If my friend came and told me, this stuff doesn't matter, these details, why do you care about these details so much? I'd say, no, it matters because of this reason. What's the reason that he hasn't told us? Inshallah, that we will leave for tomorrow night. With that, inshallah, we'll bring tonight's talk to an end. Rahimallahu man qara'a surat al-Fatiha ma'a as-salawati ala Muhammadin wa ali